Hi, my turn. I actually tried telling my story from the top of my head. It ended up being way too long. So today I decided to write it out, and it's still really long. Hopefully, I can read it fast. I'm reading it so that I don't like I tend to do. So I'm reading it. Here's my story. Excuse me. Hi. Hi. My name is Marta. I was diagnosed in May of 2010 at 43 years old. At diagnosis, my affected areas were my sinuses, the most painful because who knew that sinuses encompass your entire head, my ears, my lungs, kidneys, and joints. So here's a brief history. I live in a small town in the Canadian Rockies in the middle of a national park. Needless to say, this is conducive to a very healthy lifestyle, including lots of hiking, biking, skiing, and general outdoor time. I cook everything from scratch, and at time of diagnosis, my daughter was 3 years old, so I was very conscious about putting only good nutritional food in our gullets. I was happily married and worked for Parks Canada at time of diagnosis. Everything in life seemed to be on track, and despite a heavy workload of working full-time and taking care of a kid and a household once at home, I was very happy with where things were. My first symptoms. First symptoms happened on our way down from the ski hill one weekend in January of 2010. My ears popped, or rather muffled, as we were driving down, moving through the elevations. This had happened before, when I've had a cold or felt under the weather, but only a few times in the past, and I knew it always clears itself up eventually. It's annoying, but temporary. It didn't clear up. About 2 weeks later, I decided to go to the local Mediclinic to see what's up and if there's anything I can do. The docs just wrote it off as temporary thing and told me to come back if it doesn't clear up. Needless to say, it didn't clear up. 2 weeks later, I went back and now was told that it's probably glue ear, a thing that happens predominantly to little kids and takes about a month or two to clear up. Since this started over a month ago, it should clear up soon, according to them. It didn't, to this day, 16 years later. But at that time, I still had hope. Sadly, not only was it not clearing up, but it was also starting to get painful, which was a new development. Near the end of February, my timeline precision is kind of fuzzy because it's been 16 years and I have managed to put this in the mental archives for very many years. So timelines up until diagnosis are kind of, ugh. Anyways, I went back, but now I was dealing with some ear pain and nightly headaches. My hearing was terrible, as it felt like I was constantly underwater. This is where the antibiotics started. I was only progressively worsening. I was given a round and told to come back once I was done. This is where I finished them and no change. I got a second round, still no change. I could see the doctors and nurses starting to get irritated with my presence and their lack of ability to solve the problem, but I felt like it was directed towards me slightly disproportionately. This is a common theme in pre-diagnosis for most chronic illness, because we're all hypochondriacs. After my third round of antibiotics, I ended up seeing a visiting doctor who was flummoxed by my situation. This doc, unlike the others, actually took my mystery home with him and called me from home to tell me to come see him the next day. I did, and he had a theory that perhaps it was a fungal infection, and now my lungs were getting into the game, and I was constantly exhausted and short of breath. The pain in my head was getting quite bold, and we got a doctor friend from the city to recommend a good ENT for my ear issues. He did, and we just needed a referral from our local clinic to get in to see him. He was ready to see me and just waiting for the referral. While waiting for said referral, I went to the pharmacy to fill my prescription for the antifungal. The pharmacist warned me that it comes with a risk to your liver, and at that point I decided not to take it, as I felt like we were just grasping at straws at this point, and the failed antibiotics didn't give me much hope. I was right to make that choice because, unbeknownst to me, my liver enzymes at that time were spiking. The clinic, or rather the person responsible for sending the referrals through, was taking their time. The ENT actually called my house telling me that they were waiting for the referral and are looking forward to seeing me, but they can't do anything without it. This is a problem. I'm interjecting myself, but this is a problem with the gatekeeper part of the medical system. My nights were getting more and more unbearable with the pain in my ears and my head, my shortness of breath, and overall body aches and pains. I went to the clinic and stood in front of the referral office asking what the heck is going on. The reply was, "Marta, there are much sicker people than you." The statement will stay with me forever because even though I looked normal on the outside, I was already feeling myself dying little by little each day. I broke into tears and told her that my 3-year-old could have put a referral through quicker. It had now been over 3 weeks, and she would come to my house. And if she would come to my house in the evening and judge how sick or not sick I am. And this is a person that I used to serve tables with, so there's no medical background to allow for any sort of triaging. I finally got my referral and was off to the city to get looked at by a specialist. I met the ENT, and he was a gruff guy who didn't have the best bedside manner, but I was happy to be under the care of an expert. He ended up explaining the whole eustachian tube thing and how under even minimal inflammation, they can close up, seal up the inner ear, which creates a vacuum and sucks in fluid from adjacent cells. And that is why your ear fills up with fluid. He called it the canary and the coal mine because apparently I'm interjecting again, but the hole in the eustachian tube is so small that even the smallest amount of inflammation will seal it up. He was going to perforate my eardrums and place little tubes in them so that the ear can drain itself out. The tubes would eventually be expelled by the body as the eardrum healed. That takes about 6 to 8 months. The procedure, although slightly unpleasant, had immediate results. Suddenly, I could hear again. The pressure instantly vanished. The quality of sound was strange and erratic, but I didn't care. I felt like I had finally overcome this very unpleasant hurdle and was elated. It was April 20th, 2010. I felt like my new life had started. I had no idea how right and wrong I was at that same time. I drove away from the doctor's office totally euphoric. It was a warm spring day, and I drove with the windows open, listening to music and all the sounds of the world around me. I stopped on the way to Mom and Dad's house at the mall and bought myself a couple of t-shirts and a pair of jeans to celebrate this new beginning. I got to Mom and Dad's and had a lovely dinner with them and spent the night before heading home to the mountains the next day. On April 21st, I drove home. Things were still off in my head, but nothing compared to the pressure I had been under the previous 3.5 months. I got home wearing my new jeans and t-shirt with optimism saturating the air all around. I hugged my little monkey and kissed Brian, thrilled at the potential of normal life again. That dream was to be shattered only a few hours later. That night, I got the worst headache I've ever had in my life. It made childbirth feel like a day in the park. I ended up going to the ER in town and was given a shot in the leg and a Percocet. That was the night I decided I will never, ever, ever again in this life take Percocet. I went from the worst headache to being so violently ill and pukey that at least the grossness I felt trumped the headache. I spent the next couple of days at probably the lowest I've been in my conscious life. We called the city ENT again and told him that was what was going on, so back to the city, 4-hour drive each way, to see him. He looked at my tubes and told me nothing is wrong and sent me on my way, back in the car for another 4-hour drive home. I ended up going to the ER a second time here in town with and then after a few more days ended up going to the ER in our neighboring town, Hinton, because I knew they had better diagnostic equipment, and that was where my daughter was born, so I had faith in that hospital. I decided to arm the doctor with I'm about to see with as much info as I could. I wrote down every symptom I've had and when. I wrote down every doc I've seen and what they prescribed, every procedure, all the speculated diagnosis prior to that moment. It was written while I was in severe pain and feeling like I'm on my deathbed, but he could make out my scribbles. By he, I mean Dr. Hawk, the doctor I was lucky enough to fall under on that day. He was so young, so proper, and so pro. They did a couple of diagnostic tests and couldn't find anything. I went home empty-handed yet again. Interjecting again. He ended up calling me while I was in the hospital in Edmonton, and he actually had come up with the disease group like Wegener's falls under. So he was the closest pre-diagnosis to a diagnosis. A few days later, I once again decided to go to the city, now desperate and really feeling like I'm in my last days of life. I got yet another appointment with the ENT, and off we went to another fateful 4-hour drive. I felt like I was barely hanging on to my life force. We drove straight to his office, and I can see that he's visibly frustrated with me. His receptionist had more compassion in her pinky than he had in his entire big body. This didn't help me, though, because it was him I was seeing, not her. He motioned me into his office and gave me a cursory look and told me that what I'm feeling is a mastoid infection. And yes, it's painful, and I'll just have to suck it up and deal with it until it goes away. He prescribed more antibiotics. Brian was happy to hear this because it meant it was something that could be dealt with, but I knew with all my being that he was wrong. A mastoid infection would not affect my entire body like I was being infected. Diagnosis time. The next day, May 6th, 2010. Brian was jonesing to go back home as he had a bike ride planned with his buddy Dave. This downtime on my part for so long was putting a damper on his physical activity. I felt bad. But I also felt that if I do that trip again, it would probably be my last one ever. I was on my last legs, literally, and I knew that the ENT diagnosis was not the case. I told him that I cannot go back home and need to stay in the city and close to a hospital. He was obviously disappointed. He said he'd go home and Hannah would stay with me in the city. After all, it was only a mastoid infection. I told him that I'm barely hanging on right now, and there's no way that I can take care of Hannah if I can't take care of myself. She was only 3 at the time and needed to be cared for. Brian left quite upset with Hannah in tow, and I was left alone with Mom and Dad. But everyone knows that sometimes the best and safest place to be is with Mom and Dad. Not even 2 hours after they left, I told my parents I needed to go to a hospital. I was going downhill super fast, and not in the fun way that you do on a bike or skis. We went to the U of A hospital where the ER receiving woman, I use the term loosely, was subhuman and absolutely lacking anything even close to humanity or compassion. She berated me as I approached because my phone had the audacity to ring because my husband was calling me from the road where service is very sporadic as you near the mountains. I felt like giving her the finger as I spun around using my last bits of energy and walked out of the hospital just as Dad was walking in after finding a parking spot. We got back in the car and went to the Royal Alexandra Hospital where humans manned the admitting desk. After hearing my issues, the lovely and compassionate lady at the desk asked if she should put ear problems or post-operative complications in the form. I instantly knew that the latter was the way to go, as it would open me up to other specialists and not just be stuck with an ENT, and I knew this was not an ear-only problem. At this point, breathing was extremely difficult. The pain throughout my body was unbearable. I could barely hear, and now my nose was bleeding sporadically. I got there during shift change, so the doctor who saw me immediately was leaving for the night and ordered the male nurse to administer some morphine. But he too was mid-shift and went for lunch forgetting the order. I then got another doctor, a piece of work. He was talking to me and was quite belittling. He came in fresh for his shift, hair all coiffed and up and with hairspray, smelling heavy of perfume even though my sense of smell was already diminished. Hawaiian shirt unbuttoned 3 buttons down, exposing his freshly acquired suntan. He was short but managed to raise his head in a manner so that he can look down on you regardless of his height. This is how he talked to me. As he was standing there, poised like a wannabe model while asking for my history, my nose started to bleed. Buddy saunters up to me, and while I'm talking and trying to keep my blood from getting everywhere, and instead of giving me something to keep my nose from dripping all over, or Kleenex perhaps, he pinches my nostril and says, "This is the way you stop a nosebleed." I recoil because I have a nose ring, and he actually perforated my septum by pinching it together, and now it's bleeding even harder, and there's a different hurt now because he just pierced my inside of my nose. As I pull back and say, "Oh, I have a nose ring," he replies, "Do you have tattoos to go with your nose ring?" If I had any strength, I would have kicked that little peacock in the shins. Just as this is happening, I feel something large in my throat. I start coughing and choking on it, and suddenly I spit out a golf ball-sized blood clot. Sorry, too much information, but we're here. His eyes widened and suddenly he started paying attention. At this point, actually, I'm kind of glad for that happening. At this point, just talking was making me short of breath, and I was having a real hard time just being. He decided to send me for a chest x-ray and disappeared. I was wheeled off to the x-ray and then brought back to the to wait for the results. Dad was outside. Seeing me in that shape was too much for him. Mom was beside me. Then the doc comes back in the room, but Mom told me that just outside he asked if I have any children. Mom told him that I have a 3-year-old, and he said, ugh, and grimaced an unhappy look. He came into the room and said, I've looked at your x-ray, lung x-ray, and I'm sorry to say that you have late-stage lung cancer. He then patted me on my head. I saw the world spin. I saw Mom lose her footing. I felt blackness engulf me, but weirdly, I was also relieved that I finally have something real that matches how I feel. And at that moment, I told myself that I don't care what it is. I will see my daughter grow up. I will be there for her graduation. I will see her get married and have kids. I asked what that means operationally, like what are my next steps? He said I would get in contact with an oncologist. They would have to see if the cancer has metastasized from somewhere else. He suspected that it had because my lungs were littered with spots. And he told me I should make my final arrangements. I was going to be held in secondary ER overnight until they could find me a room. I finally got my morphine and everything started to matter less. I had to call Brian, who had just gotten home from the city, to tell him the news. It was not a great phone call. Probably the worst phone call I have ever made. He was now heading back to the city with Hannah. I was relieved that I was no longer under the care of an ENT who was telling me to suck it up, and it was nothing more than a mastoid infection. I was surrounded by real doctors with a more holistic approach to disease treatment. I felt safe for the first time in a very long time. That night, I had a lovely lady doctor in charge of secondary ER, and she was being shadowed by a first-year med student. I can't remember his name, but Alfred's son seems to be popping into my head. He didn't say anything throughout the night, but was talking to the main doc as they hovered over my bed. I was in and out throughout the night due to the morphine and finally feeling like I'll be taken care of if something goes wrong. The next morning, May 7th, 2010, I have an issue with May 7th. I woke up to a bright, bustling room full of patients, family members, and many doctors and nurses. Brian was beside me. There was other family members around me. I had sent Mom and Dad home because they were by my side for far too long the previous day, and I think I drained them. I knew it. Suddenly, in the far left side of the room, I see a group of white coats in a huddle. They're chatting, and then they look at me, and then they go back to chatting, and then they look at me again. In their midst was the young doctor from the night before, from the night shift. In my mind, I'm thinking, whoa, what's going on here? And then suddenly they start walking towards me. They arrive and flank my bed in a semicircle. I'm looking up at about 8 backlit humans wearing white coats and looking down on me, kind of wild, angelic almost. Then the obvious head doctor says to me, "Hi, my name is Dr. Shahzad Zia, and we're teaching group here at the hospital. This is my resident, Dr. Allison Kidd, a beautiful woman, and we're called the Green Team. We think you've been misdiagnosed, and we'd like to take your case on if you agree." I was over the moon. Absolutely, you can take my case on. I don't think I said that, but in my mind. I agree. I said that I would love it and I will call them my dream team instead of the green team, and I was officially in a House episode. Dr. Kidd was a dynamo. I was instantly set off for CT scans and a bunch of other diagnostics. She organized a lung biopsy for the next day, May 8th, which was a Saturday, and they got me into the room in the hospital until I got my biopsy. Things went fast that day. By the afternoon, I was meeting the thoracic surgeon who would do my biopsy along with his anesthesiologist. I was in good spirits because I was A, hopped up on morphine, which didn't get rid of the pain but made it less important, and B, people were not treating me like an annoyance or a hypochondriac for the first time in a very long time. Shit was real. She not only organized the biopsy for the next day, when the operating theaters were not normally operating, but also organized a pathologist in the room to make diagnosis immediately. So no waiting, like I said, dynamo. May 8th, I get wheeled out of my room with the 3 other ladies, one of which was apparently famous for stealing your food, and into a dark, quiet, cold operating room with not a single human in sight. It was kind of eerie. The nurse told me that when it's functioning at normal capacity during regular hours, it's loud and chaotic and full of bustling humans. This was very unusual, according to her. I was just wheeled past my whole family and saw a lot of teary faces en route to the OR. I, however, knew everything would be okay. I came out of the other side of the anesthesia in a new room with a new roommate and a hose coming out of my rib cage that made me totally feel like I was Borg. It was draining my lung. The team came in and told me that the biopsy was a success and their misdiagnosis assertion was correct. I did not, in fact, have terminal lung cancer, but had an autoimmune disease called Wegener's granulomatosis. They said it was very rare and had no cure, but could be managed with drugs. It does have a history of killing more than 85% of patients, but with new treatments, the prognosis is greatly improved. I was never more happy than that day that I heard that I have a lifelong, incurable disease that could kill me, but might not. I think that cancer misdiagnosis and being told to make my final arrangements was a blessing in disguise. It gave me perspective unlike anything else I could have gotten. It made me happy to have Wegener's, even though I had to write it down in my phone so I could remember the name. I was put on prednisone that day and told about the chemo I would be on for a while to suppress my immune system response against my own vasculature. I had no idea chemo was used for anything other than cancer, but whatever it takes, I'm on board. I chose to take the chemo in pill form rather than infusions due to my remote location, and after another couple of weeks in hospital, I was released with my new drug regimen and a new lease on life. I was a shell of my former self, but I was on the mend. The pred instantly got rid of the majority of the pain. It was actually kind of wild, like 15 minutes, and that insane pain that I had been feeling for months. I was put on 60 milligrams of prednisone, 150 milligrams of Cytoxan or cyclophosphamide, same thing. I also took dapsone to protect me from PCP pneumonia due to my suppressed immune system, and calcium to protect me from the steroids, which tend to thin your bones. I became a permanent fixture in the medical system, and at first I was grateful as I was no longer treated like a hypochondriac and felt like things were improving. But after a while, it started getting tiring. I was a complete geek on the front end of this whole experience with keeping all my blood test results. I have binders, looking for patterns, being super involved. It paid off because I feel like I have my own real live PhD in Wegener's. After a couple of years on the chemo, I found a new doctor after a flare and getting ghosted by the rheumatologist I was assigned at the hospital. He was also a piece of work. We won't even talk about him. And my new roomie is the most amazing doc imaginable. She took me off the chemo and started using rituximab, a B-cell ablation biologic. I don't use it as a maintenance drug like a lot of other people do, just because I can see how it gets weaker with time. Your body starts to develop a resistance. So I keep it in my back pocket as a go-to for emergency flares. Weaning off pred is also super tricky and almost an art. So I'll do a podcast about that because I think that is its own worthy podcast. The chemo put me in early menopause, which had I known in June of 2010 that was my last month, I would have thrown a party, but I didn't know. What was I going to say? My last flare, this is 2026. I still have a lot of residual stuff that was damage caused by the initial disease and the many years that I had flares going forward. But my last flare was 2019. August is the last time I had an infusion. So I feel really, really blessed. It could come back anytime. A flu could trigger it, but I'm staying away from vaccines because for me it was the vaccine that triggered it, and the H1N1 vaccine. So that's been keeping me pretty good. I'll talk about that in a separate episode too. My family has been in my corner through every moment of this insane journey, and I feel so bad for them because when you're the one who's sick, you actually have something to do. You just deal with it. You go inside and you deal with it and you survive. The loved ones on the sidelines can't do anything but watch you in your darkness, and I would much rather be the patient than the loved one of the patient. I think that's a much harder job, being the loved one. I think it's a much more darker and more difficult journey. So I thank them all. Thank you all. And I love you guys infinitely. And that's my attempt at a condensed version of my Weggie story. It ends right after diagnosis. And there's been so much that I have learned through the years. And I will make separate episodes about that. And thank you for being with me. And that's the end of our Weggie series. And hopefully you got something out of it. Share it if you did. Pass it on to newly diagnosed Wegener's patients. Granulomatosis with polyangiitis now, GPA. And feel free to write in the comments anything you want to share. If you would like to share your own story, write to me in the comments and I'll send you a link to where you can contact me, and then I can put yours on here as well if you so desire. Thank you so much, and may all the angels in a house episode be with you. Thanks. Peace out.